Oral History Project in their words.
Okay. I'm William H. Ramsey, and I live in North Little Rock at 7509 Geronimo Circle.
Mr. Ramsey, my first question for you deals with what knowledge you had, or how present was the war overseas in Europe and in the Pacific prior to the attack at Pearl Harbor. Did you think about it much? Tell me your knowledge.
Oh, I had no knowledge at all. I was working for a construction company in Oklahoma. I had taken one semester off here at State Teachers College to earn a little money. And I was working for a construction company building a high voltage power line from Ashtown, Arkansas to Broken Bow, Oklahoma. And we were living in a boarding house in McAllister, Oklahoma. On the night of December the 6th, we were at a bowling alley downtown. We had a riotous time. It was a Saturday night, and we all went home. And the next morning we woke up, and the landlady was downstairs in the parlor with the radio on, and you could hear President Roosevelt talking, and the voices were crackling in the radio. It wasn't a very good connection. But he was talking about the Japanese attacking Pearl Harbor, and we are looking at each other saying, where's Pearl Harbor? What is that? We don't even know what that is. So that was my introduction to what was going to happen. I had no idea all I could find the Pacific on a map, but that's about all. I didn't know anything at all about any of it.
Well, how did you find yourself involved in Uncle Sam's military?
Well, I had been in the Texas National Guard while I was a high school student down in East Texas. I lived in a little town right below Texarkana down here, and I joined the National Guard. My father had been a National Guard officer in World War I, and he belonged to that same company, the 36th Division, which was all Texas National Guard. And I joined the Guard in about 1938, I think, or 39, something like that. And I was there along with some of my friends who were high school students, too. And I was in the Guard as a private in an infantry company for about 2 years. And when I graduated from high school, I got a discharge because I couldn't come to drills at night. That was what my discharge said, inability to attend drills. So as it turned out, that was really a blessing in disguise. And so I had been I knew a little bit about the service when I got to, when I went back in the service. So when that night, the very next night after the Pearl Harbor event, on the night of the 8th, I guess, my father called me at that boarding house, and he got me on the phone. He said, "Bill, you want to fly, don't you?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "Take my advice and don't go down to the recruiting office and enlist because they'll put you in the infantry." I said, "Yes, sir, I'll take that." So when the job was completed that I was on, it turned out that we could, it worked in with going back to college. And I came back to school the next semester. And some of my friends, we went down to the federal building on Capitol Avenue and here in Little Rock and took the aviation cadet exam and enlisted as aviation cadets.
Your father asked you want to fly, don't you?
Yeah.
Was it something you'd wanted to do for a while?
Yes. He knew that I was interested in flying, and I had the flying bug. My brothers and I used to sail little model airplanes out the upstairs window in our bedroom, and that's what got me interested in flying. And I had an interest in that, and I had been to some of those big maneuvers as a private in an infantry company in Louisiana, and walking through a swamp with bugs and beetles and things all over you, and hot and sweaty, and sleeping in a pup tent. And I knew that wasn't for me. And that is another thing that motivated me to get in the flying business.
Talk to me about basic training.
Well, when we left, they called a whole bunch of us up together all at the same time. They called us down here to Little Rock. We were all college students from different colleges here in Arkansas. There's a whole gaggle of these people. There were probably several hundred of us. And they had us down here in Little Rock in a hotel, and they gave us a rudimentary physical exam, and they put us on a troop train at the old Rock Island Station here in Little Rock, and they shipped us to Shepherd Field at Wichita Falls, Texas. And it was in the wintertime, and it was cold, and it was miserable, and it was. I knew a little bit about basic training, and I knew how to march, and I knew how the close order drill because I'd been in the National Guard. I knew some of those things, and even though we were aviation cadets, supposedly we still had to go through basic training. And after that was over, why they shipped us to a college training detachment, which was just a holding thing, I think, because they had more cadets than they knew what to do with, prospective cadets. And I went to Santa Ana, California, was the aviation classification center that I went to. And it was more the same. They're marching and drilling and harassment and hazing and that sort of stuff. And based on your physical exams and the aptitude test you took, they classified you either as a bombardier or a navigator or a pilot. The best I can remember, you could, if you had all the other physical attributes, if you were colorblind, you couldn't be a pilot, but you could be a bombardier, I believe, and a navigator. So that was the cutoff point for people that were colorblind, and they had tests that could find out about that right away. And so that's and then once you were classified as a pilot, you went through 3 stages of flying. You went to primary flying school, and mine was at Thunderbird Field at Phoenix, Arizona.
Okay, we'll pause it. Let's talk about your primary school. And what was one of the most interesting things that may have happened to you during primary?
Well, just getting in one of those airplanes. It was an old biplane. It was an old Stearman. You had to wear a helmet and goggles, just like you see in pictures of World War I or barnstormers. And I had an instructor that wasn't. He could fly the airplane. He wasn't very good at teaching other people how to fly it. And when you made him mad, he would stick his Gossport out in the wind, and it was hooked up to your helmet. And your helmet would go out like this, and the roaring in your ears, and you couldn't hear for a minute or two. But I survived all that. But you flew after you soloed. You flew one day. You'd fly with him, teaching you new maneuvers or demonstrating things you had before. And the next day you'd fly solo, and then the next day you'd fly with him again. So every other day you flew. After you checked out, you flew solo in the airplane by yourself. And then every other day, the odd days, you flew with him. And I don't remember now how many hours you flew in primary, but you had to perform a basic check when you got through. They had acrobatic maneuvers you had to do. And they leaned on that. They made be real sure that you had practiced all these maneuvers and you could do them all. And once you demonstrated to an instructor pilot that you could do all these maneuvers, you were home free. You could move on to basic flying school.
Let's talk about basic. What was it? What did you learn in basic?
Well, you had a different airplane, and it had a radio in it, and you had to talk to the tower on the radio, and he'd tell you where you were in the traffic pattern and what your instructions were. In primary, there were no radios in those airplanes. It was a bigger airplane. It had a radio, and it had a lot of things that you didn't have in an open cockpit airplane. You could crank the canopy back and forth, two-way intercom radio, and you could talk to somebody else. And this was your introduction to instrument flying. They put a hood over your head, and you had to fly a certain pattern and maintain an altitude and make time turns and descents and climbs and things like that. And you had to complete that before you went on to advanced flying school.
Let's talk about advanced.
All right, my advanced school was at Marfa.
I want to pause you and ask you one question before we go into advanced. Do you recall the first time you soloed? I'm sure that happened at basic. Explain that experience.
Well, it wasn't anything to be apprehensive about. It. That happened in primary when that old Stearman, the old biplane, when you finally demonstrated to the instructor that you could land the airplane without tearing it up or bouncing all over the field. He pulled up in front of the operations building and got over the side and took his parachute with him and said, "Okay, you've got it. Take it around the traffic pattern and land 3 times." And land 3 times, take off, come back around 3 times. And he and his other people were there watching all this. And then you were cleared for solo then.
Advanced.
This was at Marfa, Texas, which is in the Big Bend country of Texas, about 120 or 30 miles from El Paso, southeast of El Paso, right out in the Big Bend, in the middle of nowhere. And there's nothing but sagebrush out there. It's in the vast open nowhere. And I was the only guy in my class that was from Texas. And they gave me holy hell about that weather out there. And I was from East Texas. It was as foreign to me as it was to them. And I remember there were old tar paper shacks. The buildings were covered with the tar paper felt covering like you have on a roof before you put the shingles on. And these were old barracks, and we were living in barracks, rows of bunks down through there, and a coal stove for heat. And somebody had to stoke the stove, and they would draw lots to see who that was. And then the flying was more the same, only we were in twin-engine airplanes this time, 2 engines. And the planes we were flying were UC-78s, which is a Cessna. It's built by Cessna, and it was a wooden airplane. We call it the bamboo bomber. It had a fuselage, and the wings were all fabric covered, and the engines had wooden props on them. And when you cut an engine, you had to demonstrate to cut an engine, it would yaw to one side, something terrible. And you had to learn to counterbalance that by lowering the wing on the opposite side and trimming the airplane to fly as best you could, straight and level. And sometime before my time there, a cadet, maybe 2 cadets, I'm not sure who was in the airplane, but 2 guys got in trouble with that propeller out like that. They were trying to make a landing, and they turned on the side into that dead engine, and they got into a flat spin, and they couldn't get it out, and they crashed, and it killed them. And the edict went out then, don't turn into a dead engine. If you make a turn, if you make the turn the other way. And we didn't know what that was all about. If that's what they say, that's what we're going to do. So on graduation day, we're standing up, lined up, the seniors are standing there, the other cadets are passing in review, and we're standing there with our wings, and we're as proud as we can be. We think we've got the world by the tail. And they've arranged for a P-38 from Williams Field at Phoenix to come over there. And at the appointed time on the radio, he comes roaring down across that flight line, and he feathers a propeller on the side where we're standing, and he does a slow roll into that engine. He pulls her up going away under the sun. And we're standing there, what's this crap about not turning into a dead engine? What's that all about? Somebody's lied to us. And we've laughed about that for years. If you know anything at all about aviation, you know exactly why it wouldn't work in those little underpowered airplanes we were using. He had jacked the airspeed up on that thing, so when he feathered that engine, he had lots of power on the other engine, and he had a lot of airspeed, and he just turned right into that engine and pulled up into the sky going back to Phoenix. And we never forgot that. And but that was the thing I remember about advance. We got our wings all right, but there were so many things we needed to know, we needed to learn. We were very aware that we needed to learn we were going to have to learn some things.
Was it the first time you'd seen a P-38?
No. First time I saw one, I think, was in the classification center. They took some of us as cadets in a bus over to the Orange County Airport. And there was a guy over there and had a P-38 over there that just landed there from somewhere. And believe it or not, it was a guy that played on the football team out here for Warren Woodson. His name was Jack Landers, and he had just come back from the Pacific. And I didn't know him very well, but I knew who he was, and I knew him. And I talked to him for just a second. And he was a captain, I believe, at the time, and he had 14 and a half zeros. He had all painted on the side of his airplane there. I never saw him again after that. He's gone now, but he the Confederate Air Force, I believe, has an airplane with his name on it, a P-38 with his name on it.
After advance, where did you end up?
Well, our entire class went to the Troop Carrier Command. Now, the classes depends on what the demand was. At that time, the 8th Air Force in Europe was eating up crew members like a meat grinder, and they had to have a lot of crew members, and so they took whole classes of cadets and sent them through their special schools that were to teach them to fly B-24s or B-17s. And the class ahead of us, and there's 2 or 3 classes ahead of us, every single person went to B-38 to B-17s, the 8th Air Force. They eventually wound up in the 8th Air Force. Our entire class went to Troop Carrier, and some of us went to one guy, just one guy, was assigned all by his lonesome self as a replacement pilot to an outfit in New Guinea. None of us could figure that out. Never heard of him since then. Don't know what happened to him. He may not still be alive. And most of us went to Bergstrom Field at Austin, Texas, and then to Malden, Missouri, to learn to fly C-47s. And you went back to school just like a regular classroom. You learned about how all the stuff inside the airplane, the hydraulic system, the electrics, and all that stuff. And then you get out and fly with an instructor, and you go through the engine out procedures and the emergency procedures and all these kind of things. And they put you in crews, and they were supposedly training us for the invasion of Europe, we found out later, and they were towing gliders. In Malden, Missouri, if you tow 2 of those big gliders behind a C-47, it's not terribly overpowered anyway. And you put 2 gliders behind that thing, and it's really hanging in there. And if you're trying to fly formation with a double glider tow, and especially at night, that's on the ragged edge, because as you make a turn, the guy on the high side has to speed up to make it around the turn. The guy on the low side has to pull back and slow down. Well, he's already about to the edge of his stall speed, and the guy at the top, these glider pilots he's towing are yelling, "You're going to pull the wings off of my airplane. You're pulling me too fast." Well, there was always an argument about that sort of stuff, but nobody ever lost it. The wings never came off of one of them, and the guy on the bottom never stalled out, but it takes half of the state of Missouri to make a 180-degree turn up there to get back to Malden. But this was just one of the experiences, and then we went to, we left there, and we were going to, they sent us to Fort Wayne, Indiana, to Bear Field. And I believe we picked up all of our overseas gear, our personal gear, like this jacket, like boots, helmets, your weapons, everything they were issued to you right there. And then they put us on a train, a troop train, going to Miami Beach. And we got to Miami in last part of October, I believe, in 44. And let's see, yeah, I think that's about right. And they put us up in the Floridian Hotel. This hotel was one it was bought and owned by the Army, and everybody in that hotel were people like us that were going overseas. You went to rooms, you went downstairs to eat your meals, but you were in your room. You could go to town, you could do anything you wanted to do, but they had roll call twice a day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon, and you better be there, or you'll be charged with AWOL. You'll be absent without leave, and you had to be there. And then when they got ready to ship your crew out, you'd get a notice that you were restricted to the hotel for 10 or 12 hours or something like that. And they put you on a bus and take you out to the old 36th Street Airport at Miami, put you on a C-54, and you didn't know where you were going. You still didn't have any idea. And when the airplane takes off, and he's climbing out, and I'm looking out the window, and I'm saying to myself, I wonder if I'll ever see that again. And the clerk, or a crew member, somebody comes down the aisle with an old-fashioned wicker end basket with sealed envelopes with everybody's name on them. And he gives one to each one of us. And that's where you got your orders. That's where you knew where you were going. And fortunately, we were all going to the same, we were going to India. We were going to Sukhothai, India, to a troop carrier outfit. We didn't know where Sucreting was. We couldn't even spell it. And we went from Miami to Belém. It was the port of entry into Brazil. And he lost an engine on the takeoff out of Brazil, out of Belém, and had to go back in there. This was at night. And so they put us up in some quarters down there, and they had to ship an engine from Miami down to Belém to put on that airplane. So they put us on another airplane. And we went from there to Recife in Brazil, across the South Atlantic to Ascension Island, and then from Ascension to the Gold Coast in Africa. From there to Magaduri, which is a French settlement in the middle of Africa somewhere. From there to Aden. And Aden is like sitting on top of the furnace with the burners on. They're in a cool place in Aden. And we refueled at Aden, and then we went on to Karachi. And Karachi was the port of entry for the CBI theater. The airplanes that we had when I got to India, to the 1st Troop Carrier Squadron, we had what was known as an 18-plane squadron. I don't remember how many pilots they had, but there were 18 planes assigned to that squadron. And every one that I ever flew, it was old and worn inside. The knobs and the handles on the control panels up front, the propellers, the propeller controls, the throttle controls, the mixture controls were all worn shiny bright. It worn the metal run the paint off right down to the metal. The dials on the instruments, the glass on was clouded with age. You could still see the needles behind them, but it was hard to see. And the dirt and dust everywhere, and if you had been hauling mules or other stuff in the airplane, it smelled like a barnyard. And but it flew, and it ran like a Swiss watch. The C-47 is the Model T of the aviation age. It would run when nothing else would. And a C-47 was a jewel to fly. And you had to learn very quickly how to fly in instrument conditions, because during the monsoon, everything down there is the rain is just out there. It's just like a fog. It just sits there and drizzles all day and all night and all day and all night for months at a time. It was a foggy day. You couldn't see beams, and it was my time to. The basher we were living in, they sent an old Dodge Power Wagon came out to pick up the people who were going to fly that morning, and I was one of them. So I put my gear in the back of the truck and got in along with some other guys. I got down to the mess hall, had breakfast, and got back in that vehicle and went down to the flight line. And the aircraft commander was a guy named John Mowat from San Antonio. And he had come on another vehicle. I'd never seen him before. And I was a brand new flight officer in the squadron. Been there 2 days or something like that. So we got on the airplane. I introduced myself to him. And so he said, okay, go around the airplane and do the outside walk around check. And I'll go inside and check the cargo manifest. And we'll see what's going on. I said, okay. So that's what we did. We crawled in the airplane. The fog was down on the ground. I thought, we're not going to fly in this kind of stuff. And he fired up the engines, and the tower said, can you see where you're going? And John said, I think so. And so he very carefully moved around among the taxiways, and he got to the edge of the runway. He said, yeah, I think I can see the runway there. He said, okay, I'm at the run-up area. And the tower said, go ahead and run up and call me when you're ready. So we ran the engines up, checked them, and pulled out on the runway, and I locked the tail wheel. He said, tell the tower we're ready to go. And I thought, this is going to be a laugh. I'm not sure I want to see this. And so the tower said, you're cleared for takeoff. We rolled down that runway, and John was an old-timer, and he knew he could fly those instruments just like they were painted on the dial. I watched the compass, and I watched the runway lights on the outside, and that thing didn't waver. It was like it was going on, like it was on rails going down that runway. And the runway lights were going to faster and faster on the side, and we were picking up speed, and the tail wheel comes up. We lift off, smooth as glass. I pick up the gear, set the cowl flaps, and we climb on out. He looks at his watch, and he's checking, very carefully checking the time. He takes up a heading. He didn't tell me anything. That's all he tells me. I'm just watching him. He's watching me. I found out later. And he flies, climbs to, I don't know what altitude, but six or seven or 8 or 9,000 feet, something, and changes to another heading, looks at his watch, and then he flies for a distance and makes another heading and pulls back the power and starts letting down. Well, he's in the clouds by this time, and I knew we were in the mountains. And what on earth are we doing here? And he goes down and down and down, and I was almost ready to say something to him, and we broke out, and we were in the very northern end of the Hukong Valley in Burma, right where the Burma Road, where the Lido Road starts down into the Lido Valley. And you could see underneath the cloud deck for 40 miles in any direction. And he said, this is the road, and this is a village here, and this is one here, and this is Shimbuang over here where 2nd Troop is located. But right on down, he knew where everything in there was. Went right on down that road, followed it all the way down the valley. We passed Missional and Bomo, went down to where we were going to put these supplies off. We landed at a little strip down there that had been bulldozed out, some rice paddies. Unloaded, there was a GI truck, and some coolies rolled up, unloaded the airplane. And we weren't there very long because you could hear automatic weapons fire out off in the distance somewhere there. And we weren't going to hang around there very long. And they were in a hurry, too. And I really don't know what we had. It was in bags and boxes. It could have been food. It could have been ammunition. It could have been anything. And they all unloaded it all on this 6x6 truck. As soon as they finished, we slammed those doors shut and drove off. And we went home, climbed back into the clouds, and flew up back home again, same way. By this time, the fog had gone at Sukrating, where we were based. We made a normal landing. That was it. And years later at a Hump House convention, I hadn't seen him since the war was over. And so I didn't recognize him. And we laughed about that mission. And he said, yeah, we do that all the time. And it wasn't, well, within 6 months I could do the same thing. But you get to be very proficient in instrument flying if you have to. You have to. The problem was a couple of things. The people, and I'm including myself in this group of the people, didn't have much experience with that kind of flying. We were low timers. But the thing that made the Hump so dangerous was not the Japanese, it was the weather. Thunderstorms and stuff. They didn't have radar. We didn't have, all these airplanes were relatively low-flying airplanes. We went to China on the easy route. The minimum en route altitude on the easy route was 13,500. You couldn't get any lower than that. You had to be that high to be safe. And if the winds were blowing and you were off course, it could blow you to your left, to the north. And you could be in deep, serious trouble because the mountains were higher up there. A lot of people jettisoned their loads to make them lighter so they could stay afloat. And a lot of them are hauling, if you're hauling oil barrels with drums of gas, you can't get those out very easy. The other cargo you can jettison some of that stuff. But still, it's a dicey proposition. Some of those airplanes wouldn't fly very well on one engine. And we switched to C-46 aircraft in April of 1945. And we had minimum amount of training because it didn't spare us any time. I took my first load of Chinese troops out of Burma back to India, back to China, in a C-46 out of Warzoop. I think I had 16 or 17 hours of experience in that airplane. That's all. If that airplane had just burped on takeoff, I wouldn't be sitting here. But we got it over there and got it back. And C-46 was a better airplane for flying the Hump than C-47 was. But coming back, you came back on the Charlie route. And the Charlie route was to the north. And that's high altitude stuff. The minimum en route altitude on the Charlie route was 19,500 feet. You couldn't be any lower than that. And our airplane, C-46s, sometimes had to struggle at 19.5. The other airplanes, the C-87 Liberator Express and the C-109s, the tankers, these were versions of the B-24 Liberator. It looked like that from the outside. The airplanes looked the same, but they were different inside. And those airplanes had turbo superchargers. They could get up on top of the weather. They could move along up there. But we would get it, if you go through a cloud at 19,000 feet, If the top's of one of those, it's violent turbulence that tosses you all over the sky. You get carburetor icing, your engines backfire, and the props surge, and it's not. It doesn't do much for your confidence. And it's 500 miles of that, 475 miles from China to India. And if the weather's bad, and if it's at night, and if you're on the Charlie route coming home, if you miss a turn, there's one dog leg up there. If you miss that dog leg, you miscalculate your time, and you fly right into Mount Tally over on one side there. And there's several people that I don't know them personally, but I know of several that flew into that mountain. And they never got anybody back, nothing. They flew right into a glacier, and that's it. And they'll be there when Gabriel blows his horn, right there. And the weather is the main feature. Well, we were aware that those people had to, that people were depending on us because we carried everything they. When General Merrill and his marauders were trying to push the Japanese back down to Rangoon, everything they had came in there by air, and we have even hauled pack mules, 2 at a time, in a C-47 down there to one of those strips down there, and back the mules out of there and be off when somebody was there waiting for a mule skinner right there for them. If the Japanese were advancing in one particular area, I have moved a whole village. Your orders were to land at a certain strip down here and be ready to pick up this village. Well, I don't know what that didn't mean anything to me. I wasn't sure what that was. And so we landed and opened the doors, and all across the paddies comes our old Papa San with his whole family, his extended family, all the little bitty kids, and they had their geese, and they had their goats, and they had their dogs, and they had everything they had, and they put them in the airplane. And we hauled them to another place out of the way so the Japanese wouldn't get to them in another place. Everything they had in the airplane. And matter of fact, you had to be very careful that they didn't start a fire on the floor back there to cook something with, too. That didn't happen to me, but it happened to one of my friends. They were flying some of the people out of there on a mission like that, and somebody up front smelled smoke. And they went running in the back of the airplane there. These guys were in the middle of the floor back there with kindling a little fire to cook a little tea and something right in the floor. And so we had to stop that sort of stuff. But, all right.
Do you recall your most memorable mission?
I guess it was the one that I remember enough in detail was our trip being first into Shanghai, what we thought was first into Shanghai. And we had moved, our squadron had moved to Chikiang, which was in the middle of western China, in the middle of nowhere. And we got ready. I was on the schedule one morning, and so we got out of our tents and went down to the ops building to check out our gear and get ready to go down to the airport, to the airplanes at the revetments. And somebody down there said, Ramsey, you and Hardwick and Steger are going to go. We've got a special mission. If you're not hauling troops today, you've got to go in somewhere else. He says, come in the briefing room in here. So we went in there. And we had only had one navigator assigned to our squadron. He didn't fly with the group. He just helped plot things out and do the logistics work about time and distance and stuff for our missions. But he was going on this trip. And so that was fairly unusual. And they didn't tell us where we were going until after we got ready to leave. And then somebody at the last minute told us we were going to Shanghai. And we thought, boy, that's great. We're about, Chikiang is about 3.5 or 4 hours from Shanghai. And during that period of time, the navigator, there's no navigation beacons, we're just following landmarks, and he has a navigation chart with a line drawn on it. It was our route of flight. And with 2 airplanes, he's in the lead airplane, the other one's following. And he's navigating by sight. And he's checking the time, distance, and everything. We get to Shanghai, all right, we're fine. Shanghai is so big and so covers so much space. we couldn't find the aerodrome, so we're circling around over Shanghai looking for the aerodrome. And finally, it's getting dark by this time, and it's drizzling. It began to drizzle rain. The ceilings began to come down, so we knew we had to get in, land somewhere pretty quick. So we finally found the aerodrome. We identified it. The two planes were talking back and forth to each other all this time, and so the navigator finally verifies that that's where we want to go. So we land at this aerodrome, and I found out later it's a Navy aerodrome, Lung Hua, and the windows have all been shot out of the hangar. There's no windows in the tower. The grass and weeds growing up through the cracks in the concrete. There's an old wrecked airplane off to one side, an old Japanese airplane. The place is in a total state of disrepair. Well, the cargo we're hauling in there there are 2 Jeeps and a trailer. These people are bilingual, and they speak Chinese and Japanese both, I think, and English, and they belong to the OSS. Now that's the organization that melded into the OSI, I guess, now. The Office of Strategic Services is what it was called then. Those people were there to catch. They were after some saboteurs and collaborators and some people like that before they went underground. And so we put the ramps down, and they took those trailers and Jeeps and drafted them out of those vehicles and drove off to town. And that just left us sitting there. They didn't tell us anything. So it didn't bother us, but we were looking for some transportation to go to town. We were there to we were to see what was going to go on in Shanghai. So around the corner comes a rickety old pickup truck, and the guy in this truck is a guy who looks like he came from Central Casting at the Universal Studios in Hollywood. He had the big boots on his feet, he had buck teeth, and he had one of the hats on, and he had that sword on. And so I had reached an agreement with him about that sword, and he got us some transportation, and we went to town. Now, Chinese money was very volatile. The rate on Chinese money went up and down like an elevator. Where we lived in India and in Burma, because that was part of the British Empire, and their money is built on the silver standard. Theirs is backed by silver rather than gold, but it doesn't vary. It stays the same. We were paid in rupees. You knew what a rupee was worth. You could go to town and spend it. You could do it just like you did a dollar. But when you went to China, if you lived in China, you were paid in American dollars. And the rate of exchange went up and down every single day. It was very volatile. And I took a $20 bill, and it was 10,000 to 1, 20,000 to 1. I got $1 million for that $20 bill. Every pocket in this jacket and my clothes, everything I had was full of money. But when you went to a place to spend it, there'd be a huge jar in the middle of the table where you were going to sit, and you put your money in that jar, and there wasn't anything less than a $10,000 bill in that stuff I had, and the drink would be $500,000 or something, or maybe it'd be pretty expensive, but you just peel that money off and put it in the jar. That's one of the wildest nights I've ever spent in my life. And the thing that I remember the most about that was when we got out of that vehicle, as we were driving down the street from the airport to the town, the side of the street, you'd think this was a parade going by. People, thousands of them on the sides of the street, waving and cheering and carrying on. And it was just getting dark by that time. And we were driving to the hotel. When he pulled up in front of the hotel, we got out and went inside the hotel. And as we went in the lobby, off to one side is the bar. And the port of Shanghai had been blockaded for 7 years. This is, not 7, about 5.5 years. It had been blockaded. Nothing had gone through Shanghai. And there's a bar back there that has everything in it that you'd see in any bar in Conway, in any club, or in Little Rock, at any club, anywhere, any brand, any type, sitting on the back pedal of the bar. And I couldn't believe it. Where did all this come from? And maybe you don't want to know. I don't know. But it was there. And we stayed there one night, and I believe the second night. We never saw those people we hauled in there again. And then we somehow, I don't remember now who it was. Somebody got a message to us through somebody, and I don't remember now how that happened. But we got a message from our operations people saying, "What are you doing there? Get on your airplane and get home." And so we couldn't hang around there any longer because we were having a good time. We were just, we hated to leave. But we fired our airplanes up and went back to Chikyang. And within a week or 10 days, that field at Lungwa was flooded with airplanes hauling stuff in and out of there. Just flooded with airplanes. And we always thought we were first. And we found out later, years later, that probably the Navy beat us in there by 8 or 10 days. But that's just part of the...
It almost seemed like you were conquering heroes.
Boy. And the very next day, that was on September the 1st in 1945, and MacArthur signed with the Japanese on the deck of the Missouri in Tokyo Bay the next day on September the 2nd. We went back to Chikyang, and 2 or 3 of us that came when I did, they sent a message down from the orderly room that you guys have finished your tour, you can go home. And so they cut some orders, told us to turn in our gear, and I kept my jacket and I kept my gun, and they said, and that sword, and they said, get your gear all packed, and you're going to take a flight back across the Hump into India and China. So they put us on an airplane, flew us back to Sukhothai or Dinjan. We got a flight down to Calcutta. They put us in a replacement depot down there, and about 10 or 12 days later, they took us to the harbor and put us on a ship. We came home on a ship. 28 days on that ship. We landed in New York. It was cold and miserable, and all we had was summer clothes. Everybody had been taking Atterbury. They were all kind of yellowish colored. Nobody had any warm clothes. And the Missouri was docked in the slip next to us over there. And everybody on the ship ran over to one side to see what the Missouri looked like, and the whole ship began to list just slightly to one side. And all those people running to one side to look. And we had, I think, 5,000 troops on board that thing. They were coming home. You only ate twice a day. You ate at 10 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. And you ate in the mess. They had poles that ran from the ceiling to the floor, and they had the tables. They ran through the tables, and they had a locking device underneath these things, and they'd run the things that they could run the tables up or down. You had to stand up to eat. There were no chairs. And you ate, and they wanted you to leave so the next shift could come in there and eat. Boy.
Letter while you were overseas?
A memorable letter? No, not really. I didn't have a girlfriend. I wasn't married, and my mother was at home, and my brothers were in school, and I had one brother was in the Navy, and he was later discharged from the Navy because he had a heart murmur, and I had two other brothers who were in a military school in San Antonio. And one of them enlisted in the Navy, and one of them was drafted. He was drafted the week after he was 18, and he was killed at the Battle of the Bulge the week before he was 19. My mother never got over that, never. And after the war, they couldn't find where he was buried. And H.L. McAllister, who was the president, the third or fourth president out here at UCA, was a brigadier general. He was the commander of he was the adjutant general of Arkansas. And when they federalized all those troops, he was a brigadier. I don't remember what his assignment was, but my mother was his sister. And she asked him to see if he could find out what happened to Tom. And he leaned on the graves registration people. And they found Tom and one other guy buried in the edge of a hedgerow, in the hedgerow country in France. And he's buried at Saint-Avold Cemetery in France.
Have you ever gone over there?
No, but my mother and father have. My dad stayed in the service after the war, and he was the Allied postal, he was the postmaster at Munich. by the Allied military government. And he took part of his leave over there, and he and Mother drove up to the cemetery at Saint-Lô, I think, in France. And they have a picture of them sitting behind his headstone.
How did you ever receive news of your brother's death?
I didn't until after the war. We got off that troop ship, and they put us in a barracks. The officers would put all the officers in a barracks, and they were going to ship us all home, and they put the NCOs somewhere else, and they're getting ready, organizing these trains to go in every direction, taking people back to your home state. And my father was stationed in New York, upper New York at that time, and I looked, we were on the second floor of this barracks, and the three of us were sitting there, we were figuring out what we were going to do with all this extra stuff, whether we were going to ditch it or whether we have to haul it home or what. And I looked down the way, and here comes my dad up the steps. I couldn't believe it. And so he had his uniform on and everything, and so we came down. I introduced him to these other guys, and I asked him about Tom, and he said, "Too bad." He says, "He's gone." And that's how I knew about that. And I was on that ship for 28 days. You couldn't get any mail, you couldn't get any communications, you couldn't get anything. So I think that's when all this happened. And that's when they found out, and they couldn't notify me. And that just killed my mother. The people that I served with over there in India and China, I only knew those people, and I served with most of them back here in the States as we were getting ready to go overseas. I only knew those people initially for maybe a year and a half. And when we finished over there, because of the circumstances under which we served and the things that happened, I knew their jokes, they knew my jokes, I knew their shortcomings, they knew mine, they knew my sins, I knew theirs. I knew what they did at home, they knew what I did at home, and I knew them better than I knew my own brothers, and it's lasted a lifetime. I still hear from some of those people, and until the Hump Pilots Group dissolved last year at Nashville, Tennessee, written into the bylaws that they would resolve at the end of the convention year in 2005, year before last, and this was the last convention because the people were getting so old they couldn't travel. And when they played Old Lang Syne that night in the ballroom, there wasn't a dry eye in the house, and that was it. And not most of them, but some of the people in there were people that I had known 60 years ago in Burma, right there. And I have a picture, a slide of the last men and women in one of the hallways in the hotel there, all with the dress uniforms and dress clothes on and everything. And that's the last picture I'll ever get of those people. And I'll hear from them. I talk to them on the phone occasionally, but I'll never see them again. But those kind of friendships lasted a lifetime. And that, to me, is a real treasure. I send 120-something Christmas cards every year, and I write on every single one of them. And that's the way I communicate with these people. I went back in the service, in 49, and my service, I went to Korea. I served a tour in Korea. And then when the Vietnam War came along, I was a commander of a support squadron at Yokota in Japan. And I went in and out of Vietnam in a C-54, just support type stuff. But I wasn't actively involved in it over there. And I retired the last day of June in 1975. And I've kept up with every one of those guys. A lot of them are gone now. But it's been a wonderful experience.